I'm going to have to stand over here so I can advance the slides, but the lady on the left is not my surprise mother-in-law. She looks a lot like her surprised mother, but that's my wife of, in June, 56 years. She would be mortified if she knew that I told you that. But she was only 12 when we got married. When we first moved to New York, some of you know this story. When we first moved to New York, all the guys at the paper wanted to know, they thought I was from Tobacco Road, wanted to know if we married our sisters down here. Some of them had read Erskine Caldwell's novels. And I said, well, yes, some of us do, if we really like our sisters. And how about your wife? Well, she's only my first cousin, which was not true. And I told a lot of other lies, too. They said, well, how old is she? We understand that you marry very young. And I said, well, how old was your wife when you married her? Well, I got varying answers, 19, 18, 22. I said, that's not smart. I said, by the time that a woman is 18 or 19 years old, she's set in her ways, and you won't be able to raise her the way she should be raised properly to take care of you. Within a half an hour, it was all over a 4-story building that this editor had come up from South Carolina and was living in an apartment over the Hudson, looking out over the Hudson River with a 12-year-old bride. I got home 2 nights later from work, and my wife was standing at the door, and she said, "What's going on?" I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Look at that." And on the breakfast table was a pile of gifts. These guys had all gone home and told their wives this, and they said, "That poor thing, she probably has nothing to keep house with." And they went out, and here were all these gifts from Gimbel's and Macy's and Bloomingdale's and whatever. She said, "Now you're going to have to get me all of their addresses because I've got to write them all a thank you note." So anyway, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Now, one of the things that the ladies, well, I call them loosely ladies, they're all female, but they're mostly business owners or business executives. And they wanted me to talk a little bit about some things that my wife and I have learned in business. Now, my wife is also my business partner. And we own 3 companies. We own them 50-50, but sometimes she acts like she's got 51%. And I tolerate that because I love her. But lesson number 1 is make sure the market wants what you have to offer. Now, we ran a local newspaper, which we now own 100%, that was losing $100,000 a year. We built it up to almost $1 million gross in 7 years. We couldn't get along with our silent partners, so we cashed out and left, and we started the Lexington County Chronicle. Now, the reason that we did this was not because a small town like Lexington could support 2 newspapers, but simply because the town worked on us. Community leaders came to us. The president of the local bank said, "Listen, if you'll get a business plan together, we'll get the money together for you to start the paper and finance you until you are profitable." So, excuse me, the technology is a little challenging this morning. I want to go back to when we took over the paper. This gentleman, his name was Godfrey Uncle Josh Harmon. Godfrey was a War of Northern Aggression veteran, otherwise known as the American Civil War. And he ran off to join the Confederate States Army when he was 14. Well, they laughed at him and sent him home. So 2 years later, he went and applied again and lied again about his age, and actually was involved in combat in Virginia. But when he came back, the people in town started working on him. And they said, Josh, you know, our local newspaper went out of business while you were gone. The war put it out of business, but we need a newspaper. Why don't you start one? So, after months of being begged and barred and whatever else, he started it in his store. Now, if you know Lexington, you know where the new courthouse is and the old courthouse is. His house was where the old courthouse is. And he had a store next door. It was a kind of a general merchandise store. It was called Harmon's Bazaar. But he bought a used flatbed press. This is one where you have to print the sheets on one side and then you turn them over and you print the other side. So that was how the Dispatch-News got started. Josh had an interesting way of doing business. Of course, there were no motor cars back then in 1870. This is our 150th year of operation. But so he rode around the county on horseback with the county treasurer who was out collecting property taxes. And he would talk with business people in these little hamlets like Pelion and Edmond and Gilbert. And he would sell advertising like Mellon's Foods, makes your baby fat and happy. And finding out what was going on in these communities, he'd come back and write it up and put it in his little newspaper. So I'm not sure quite when Josh died. I could probably find out from J.R. Fennell at the museum, but the paper, the Dispatch-News, a rival newspaper started in town around the turn of the century and didn't make it, and they finally sold out to Josh, and he made it the Lexington Dispatch-News. But by the time we got here in 1984, the poor paper was in deep debt. The publisher wanted to get out, and so for a pittance, we bought his paper and his debt. One of the things I had to do was I discovered that he had not declared at the closing that he had 27 vendors that he owed money to. One of them was his printer that he had not paid in 3 months. So I sat down, and this was pre-Windows and Microsoft and laptops, and typed 27 letters on a typewriter to each vendor, and I included a check for $25. Now some of them we were owed several $1,000s, but I said the newspaper is under new management. We are trying to turn it around, and to show good faith, we are going to pay you off, but I'll have to pay you only $25 a month. Nobody complained. But when we started the Chronicle, after we left, the paper went downhill in many ways, and people in town began to work on us. So that was the lesson. We did get a business plan together. We discovered that we could finance it with our own money, our life savings. And so we did not have to borrow money or take in any partners, which was a piece of advice that one of the publishers we went and talked with as we were doing the business plan. one of the things they said is if you can do it without partners, do it, even if you just have to borrow money from the bank. Because one of them said each shareholder meeting we have each month, they beat me up telling me how I'm screwing up the paper. So he said they're not really worth it. Lesson number 2 is have a sound plan and reliable partners. Well, I was fortunate. I had a reliable partner. I married her. And we think a lot alike. She's a lot smarter than I am. She's a lot more analytical than I am. She's more creative than I am. And I can name probably 50 other things that she's better at than I am. But she's a wonderful partner and a wonderful wife. So I had the partner part solved. The business plan was the other part of it. Now, we had done business plans for clients as business consultants, but we had to do one for ourselves. So we went to see several publishers who had done what we were getting ready to do and picked their brains, came back with scads of notes. And when we got through crunching the numbers, our accountant said, do you feel really sure that these are all the expenses we're going to have on the cost side? And I said, I'm convinced. So he said, let's add 10% more to the cost because there are going to be things that we could not anticipate. He said, now how do you feel about the revenue side? And I said, I'm sure we can do that. He said, let's take 10% off because you may not. You may have been a little optimistic. Well, that was a 20% swing in the bottom line. But he was right. We projected that we were going to break even at the 10th month. The 10th month came and went, and we still were in the red. I started not sleeping very well. And my wife, Esmeralda, if I run over, I'm going to run over, okay? My wife was lying there in bed beside me, sleeping very soundly, and I thought, why isn't she worried? We were supposed to be profitable by now. And then this voice kind of came into my head, providential, I believe, and it said, she's sleeping soundly because she hasn't lost faith in what we're doing. So that was like a flash of inspiration, and I went right back to sleep. If you are doing a business plan, follow that advice, please, and take 10% off the revenue side and add 10% to the cost side. In 1992, my wife and our sons and I and a few friends started a little weekly newspaper called the Lexington County Chronicle. This is what it looked like 25 years later. We now owned both the Chronicle and the Dispatch News and had merged them together into one stronger paper. Our competitors said when we started it we wouldn't last 6 months. Well, we not only did, but they came to us 9 years later and asked us to buy them out. We lasted and even started a free newspaper, the Lake Murray Fish Wrapper. There's some copies there if you'd like to take one home with you. And the annual Explore Lexington County Guide. Today, those newspapers have grown with special features such as Daisy Harmon, who writes a weekly around Lexington County. 35 people in our community, including several people at this table, have written for or write for regularly our newspaper. Mary Jo, for instance, writes a monthly column on living the life you love, right? I featured Daisy in this because Daisy's in the group, and she's the one who invited me to speak to them next week. Lesson number 3 is adapt to changing market conditions and technology. All of you know that newspapers are having a hard time these days, particularly big daily newspapers. And our friends in television and radio, who are also having hard times, delight in talking about how newspapers are dying and going away. Of course, television, when they came in, they talked about how radio was going to die and go away. And radio and television and newspapers are still with us. But we, among other things, were one of the first we were probably the first newspaper in South Carolina to have a website. And I thank my wife for that, who had the vision to do it. We've now been through 4 iterations of this website, and we now finally have one that is user-friendly on your smartphone or your cell phone. But anybody guess how many people visit our website each month? Just give me a number. 1,500. How about 27,000? While they're there, they visit 53,000 pages, landing pages on that site. That's some traffic. Guess how many people actually read the Fish Wrapper and the Chronicle? Give me a number. More than 25,000 a week. Newspapers are dying, huh? This is Ralph Gerald, who visited us last week, he and his wife. We publish these magazines. This is our fall sports preview. This, of course, is the one I mentioned earlier, the annual Explore Lexington County Guide. But these are also produced in digital editions, too, that go to all our readers, all our subscribers. Those are some of the numbers it was 33,000 visitors, not 37, and 53,000 page views. And as I mentioned, more than 30 local people actually contribute to this newspaper, including a senior column written by Dan Williams, who's a pastor, and one of the most entertaining history columns I guarantee you've ever read. It's not dull history, it's the story behind the stories. There's a clipboard being passed around, and I'll turn the lights back on. But if you would like to try a free trial digital subscription to our newspaper, I'd love to get your email address. Just sign up and it's all yours. And it's all right to applaud.
Oh.